and I'm delighted to be with all of you here today. Let's get going. We are going to be doing, last time we had a shir about Elul, and we were talking about the concept with Elul of the love of, somebody writes here, condolences about the Queen. I will say that the experience of watching the funeral for the Queen is giving me a lot of thoughts about Malchut as we approach Rosh Hashanah. A lot about Malchut and the value of Malchut and ceremony and fanfares. So I will just point that out. Okay, let's. We have a tradition of our Kriyot HaTorah for Rosh Hashanah. And I actually even wrote an article once about the Kriyot HaTorah, where you notice that if you look at the Kriyot HaTorah, they're all about parents and children. All of them are about parents and children. I'd even go further than that. I'd say parents and children and life and death and tears. What do I mean? We have the story of Ishmael, which is a story of life and death and tears and mother and child. We have the story of the Akedah, which is our Kriyat HaTorah, which again is about father and son, and maybe, according to Midrash, maybe even mother, and certainly in the Midrash about tears, and it's about life and death. We have the Haftorah to do with Hannah, where Hannah is the story of wanting a child, and again, life and death and having children, and you remember Hannah cries, she prays, she cries. And we have, of course, the story in Yirmiyahu, Perek Lamed Aleph, of Haben Yakir Li Ephraim, Im Yeled Shashuim, right? Our son Ephraim, Yidei Dabribo, when I think about him as Zacharis Korenu Od, and Al Ken Hamu, I yearn for my son, and of course, Rachel Mavakal Baneha. You have Rachel crying for her children, and the fulfillment of her children coming home. So a lot is about parents and children and life and death and loss and regaining life. And of course, when we turn around and talk about Avinu Malkeinu, that God is our Father, and that we are looking for life rather than death. And when we talk about that the shofar itself, in some way, its sounds are meant to be a sounds of crying, sounds of Yulule Yalil, of wailing, of crying, of Gnuneche Ganach, of a sense of, these are all very, very powerful and evocative Kriyot HaTorah. And I would like to talk about the first of the Kriyot HaTorah, which is the story of the sending away of Ishmael today. And it's indeed a very challenging story. A lot of people like to talk about the Akedah, and I'm going to choose to talk a little bit about the sending away of Ishmael, which again is another one of those challenging stories. And in a minute, I'll share the source sheet. I hope it's been shared with you. Let me actually open the chat and see whether I can share it. Oh yes, I see the source sheet has been shared in the chat, so you should have it. And maybe let me begin with a famous Gemara from Shabbat, Daf Yud Aleph, which says that why. Well, actually, doesn't really say why do we read this, but it raises the question of various different events which happened on Rosh Hashanah, and it says that it was on Rosh Hashanah that Hashem pakad et Sarah. Okay, that there are various things which happened on Rosh Hashanah. When did Sarah, so to speak, get pregnant? It was on Rosh Hashanah. I'll read the Gemara. Sorry, I didn't put it on the sheet. Rosh Hashanah nifkada Sarah, Rachel v'Chana. On Rosh Hashanah, that is when Sarah became pregnant. That is when Rachel became pregnant. By the way, I might say that with Rachel, it says Vayizkor et Rachel, and this is the day of given for the Rosh Hashanah in the Torah is Yom HaZikaron, or Zichron Trua, v'Chana, right? And then they go into, in other words, the idea being that this is a day of Zikaron. This is a day of changed fate. This is a day of special, if you want, fates being changed, kind of from childlessness Sarah too, Rachel too, from childlessness to childbearing. And this connects us, let's just share my sheet, to the first pasuk of this particular parsha, which is V'Hashem pakad et Sarah. If you look at Ka'asher Amar, Vayas Hashem leSarah Ka'asher Diber. If you look at the source sheet, or where is it here? In the middle of page 1, Bereshit, Genesis chapter 21, V'Hashem pakad et Sarah Ka'asher Amar, Vayas Hashem leSarah Ka'asher Diber. The Lord took note of Sarah as he promised, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had spoken. Sarah conceived and bore a son to Avraham in his old age. This, according to the tradition, is taking place none other than on Rosh Hashanah. So this is quite an event. And of course, the question is, I've already spoken a little bit about why we read this, but I think there's a looming question in this particular story of Sarah, of Hagar and Ishmael, which I think we all have. And that is, how could Avram send his son to die in the desert? Not only his son. How could he send Hagar to die in the desert? What a story, right? It sounds like Sarah takes a dislike to Hagar and her son. And as soon as this happened, they send them out. They run out of water. Were it not for a miracle, Ishmael would have died. What a terrible story. Abraham, the man of Chesed, what happened to all of that? What's going on with all that? So I want to try and relate a little bit to the story, maybe even intensify this with the difficulty of this story, with another, of course, formidable story, and that is the Akedah. As you can see on your sheet, I've given you the source. This is from Rabbi Amnon Zak. It's just the easiest way for me to bring this all. Many people have spoken about the story of Ishmael as almost being an Akedah. Akedat Ishmael, right? That it's almost like a second Akedah, okay? People are telling me that the sound is breaking up. I hope we'll be okay. After I spent the entire of yesterday morning trying to sort out my computer system, clearly I haven't solved it. Okay, so let's see what we have. If you take a look here, in the Akedah, in both stories, Avram has to part from a beloved son. In both instances, I'm just reading the sheet. Avram gets up early in the morning, both in the Akedah and in Ishmael. In both stories, the child, who is called a Na'ar, faces mortal danger, but ultimately is saved. In both stories, and these are the only two stories, we have an angel calling from the heavens, right? Angels in biblical narratives are more likely found on earth. In both stories, we have Ayisa, Hagar et Eineha, Batera be'er mayim, and with the story with Avraham, he lifted up his eyes and saw a ram caught in the thicket. So we have this idea of suddenly seeing something that we didn't see before. Each story ends up with the fact that the child, in case, will become a great nation. And the conclusion of the Ishmael story, Ishmael gets married. In the conclusion of the Akedah story, we hear the name Rivka for the first time. If it's true, okay, and if we are correct in this regard, then what are we saying here? We seem to be saying that Avram didn't only have one great test, the test of the Akedah, but in fact he had two. He had two great tests. He has the test of the Akedah and the test of Ishmael. Now, anybody who's prayed over Rosh Hashanah Rosh Hashanah services, Yom Kippur services will know that we're constantly mentioning the Akedah. We say even our Zichronot, V'Akedah Yitzchak Barachamim Tizkor Hayom. We have all different poems which talk about the Akedah, but nobody talks about the story of the sending away of Ishmael as another Akedah, right? So what exactly is going on? You know, is this a second Akedah? What is happening in this story? How can we justify Avram's actions in this story? And therefore, that's really what I want to do with you today, to see if we can together learn this story, tease out this story, figure out how to understand this story. So that's our plan for today. And I don't know if there are any questions or comments at this point, but if there aren't, well, let's see. Anybody want to ask something, comment something at this point? Feel free to unmute yourself and speak, because I can't see everyone. There are too many people on the Zoom.
Rabbi Alex, why not just say right out? The expulsion of Ishmael is the first Akedah, and Akedah Yitzchak is the second.
So we could say that. We could say that these are two tests of Avram's morality, two tests of his obedience in some way. What I'm saying is that somehow, in our tradition, we don't have this Akedah as a towering event. It seems to be Akedah Yitzchak, where Avram was gambling his entire future. Like, and you could say that with Ishmael, he had to send Ishmael away, but he had another son. But still, we have this sense that Akedah Yitzchak is the big test. Okay,
but doesn't Rashi say that we are being punished for Sarah's behavior?
Okay, so it's not Rashi. This is a statement of the Ramban. Nachmanides. Nachmanides said in Parshat Lech Lecha, not on this story, that when Sarah was abusive to Hagar and Hagar ran away, that somehow this was such a terrible action that we're being punished throughout time. Now, I don't really know what to make of that. But that was the story earlier on when Vata'aneh Sarai, when Sarai abused Hagar and Hagar ran away. Interestingly enough, one of the questions on that story, which we'll come back to, is if what Sarah did was so bad, why did Hashem send her back? So we'll have to try and talk about it. Okay.
Why are you calling the Nisayon from Abraham with Ishmael? Why are you calling Akedah? Akedah have to be something related to bounding. There is no bounding of Ishmael. Yes, it was a huge Nisayon for Abraham. Yes, but it's not an Akedah, to my knowledge.
Correct. Correct. Akedah means binding. It can't be an Akedah. Well, you're right. We say Abraham has 10 tests. So maybe this is one of his tests. And if this is one of his tests, then we don't need to call it an Akedah. We can just call it one of his tests. That's true. Okay, there are a few hands up. Jennifer.
Thank you, Rabbi Israel. You are such a treasure. I learned so much from you, always. So thank you. I have a question here. What do you make of the fact that as far as I know, God instructs Abraham to at that point first Avram to sacrifice his only son Isaac, but here it's not God who tells Abraham to send Hagar. I think it would be Sarah who said, "I want you to do this." Is there any significance to where the instruction comes from?
So we haven't really read the story yet, but I'm scrolling down. But if you take a look, it does say, verse 12, which you should see on the sheet, when Hashem says to Avraham, because Avraham doesn't want to do it, and he says, don't be distressed about the boy and about your maidservant. Kol asher tomar elecha Sarah shema b'kola. In other words, it's true that Sarah comes up with the idea, but God says, you heard Sarah? Listen to her, right? Listen to Sarah.
Okay, I see. So it's not that it has to come directly from God, but God said, yeah, this is fine with me. Go do it.
Well, God basically says, I know you're in a moral dilemma. Do you listen to your own conscience or Sarah? Well, I'm telling you, listen to Sarah. So I think that counts as a, okay, we're going to do a round of questions, and I'm not going to answer them, and I'm going to try and answer them all together. So Carol.
I remember once learning with Rabbi David Silber at Drisha that the Akedah is really a process for Avraham to acknowledge and accept the fact that it's Yitzchak is the one who is going to be the future and the chosen one. And so in some ways, the stories, there's a certain logic to the stories that one star is kind of rising, but he had to deal with both sides of his head and his heart to reach the acceptance that it's really Yitzchak Bincha that is going to be the future. So the struggle continues in both stories. They're really paired together.
Okay, all right. Ruhamandatu. I don't know who you are, but yes.
Okay. About the Akedah, I heard from one rabbi that actually Avraham did not understand what God told him. He did not tell him, Akriveu, Shchateu. He said, Ha'aleu. Le'alot can be spiritual also, like Aliyah to Israel or whatever. So actually, he did not understand what God told him to do.
I'll relate to that in a minute. Usher.
Just a sort of a side note, the opening line is Vashem Pakad et Sarah Ka'asher Amar. Where did he say it? Well, it was actually the Malach who said it. He said it with the words Shov Ashuv Elecha. What is the root of Shov Ashuv? Teshuvah.
Teshuvah. Okay, yeah. Okay, Shelley.
Okay, is it possible that God telling Avraham, listen to Sarah, is a concession, like God telling Moshe, you want to send spies, and that God doesn't really want to do this?
Oh, okay. So let's try and answer all these questions. I just want to relate to the point that I have also heard the interpretation that God didn't intend to ask Avram to sacrifice Yitzchak. But frankly, from reading the story, I don't think that's the case at all. And I think we're going to have to go. This isn't a class about the Akedah, so I'm going to leave it for now. But I don't think that's a tenable reading of the Akedah story personally. But let's focus on our story. And I know other people, I've given time for questions, but I think it's important. I'm worried that we won't get through the material. So with your permission, I'm going to go into the story, and let's begin to read the story and understand how to read this chapter. Okay, so let's, here we go. I hope people can see the source sheet. I'm going to quickly read the story. We all know it, but I'm going to read it. Notice the double phrase, right? We've got pakad, right? Pakad can always mean fulfilling a promise. It can sometimes be poked, avon avot al banim. It sometimes can be punishment, and it can be reward. In this case, it's reward. And God, here it says in English, took note. Some people say visit, but pakad, as we know, poked avon avot al banim, it means some sort of payback. Here it is that Hashem is rewarding Sarah. Okay, double phrase, interesting enough. Pakad and vayas. Notice that in this case, verse 1 talks about the promise to Sarah. She got the promise with the 3 angels in chapter 18. Pasuk 2 is talking about the promise to Avraham which he got in chapter 17 at Brit Milah. Notice all the time it's telling you, it's Avram's child, it's Sarah's child. It's Sarah's child, it's Avram's child. They called him Yitzchak, just to say, God had told him to call him Yitzchak. Not only that, Vayamal Avraham Yitzchak bano ben shmona yamim kasher tziva oto Elohim. Avraham circumcised Yitzchak in 8 days, like God had commanded him. But Avraham ben me'at shana bivaled lo Yitzchak bano. Avraham was 100. Vatome Sarah, and Sarah says, Chok asa li Elohim. Again, maybe God has given me joy, right? God has brought me laughter. Or option B, God has brought me mockery, right? Everybody who hears laughs at me, right? In other words, who gives birth at age 90? Who would have said to Avraham, please pay attention that we've got the notion of Yitzchak, the verb tzachak. Sarah says, God has made laughter for me. Everybody who hears will laugh with me, right? And they can't believe their luck. They can't believe their good fortune at this moment. Sorry, I should add in another Yitzchak over here. Yitzchak. In other words, 5 times Yitzchak, or the verb tzachak. So how does the parsha begin? It begins with the amazing blessing of them having a son. This is a great moment for Avram and Sarah. This is very, very exciting. And this is what we have. Okay. Vayigdal hayeled vayigamal. Okay. I hope you're with me. Verse 8. The child grew up and was weaned, and Avram held. Second. Somebody asked which translation this is. I'm not 100% sure. It might be the JPS translation. Okay, the JPS translation. I think that's most likely what it is here. The new JPS from 1987, if I'm not mistaken. Okay. All right. Let me just say, anybody who writes in the chat, I'm not really looking at the chat because I'm looking at you and I'm looking at the source sheet. So I'll have to look at the chat at the end, but I don't see your comments, most of them. Okay, so here we go. Notice, by the way, when do they make the party? Nowadays, we make a party for a baby, for their Brit, but they made a party on the day that he was weaned, maybe because in the ancient world, you weren't sure, Bichlal, that a child would survive infancy, and therefore you made it when the child moved out of infancy and became an older child. And now, here's the critical verse. She sees the Ben Hagar, the son of Hagar, Hamitzrit, the Egyptian, who had been born to Avraham. She saw him mitzachek. What does this mean? We're not going to go into this, what he did. She said to Avraham, Garei Shama Hazot, Ved Bana. Banish this woman and the child, because this child, the son of that slave woman, will not inherit with my son, with Yitzchak. Avraham was very, very upset about his son. Let me stop at this point, and I do need to point something out. I think it was a Bible, I think it was Nechama Leibovitz where I read this. And Nechama Leibovitz points out that in this story, we have an amazing laboratory of the way that the Torah uses different names for the same person without mentioning their name. You'll notice we haven't mentioned the name Ishmael here. But every character is going to relate to Ishmael with a different appellation. For Abraham, okay, what does it say? For Avraham, it says, Al Odot, Pasuk Aleph, verse 11. For Avraham, he is his son. Okay? It is just his son. For Sarah, she is Ben Amma Hazot, or Ben Hagar HaMitzrit, the son of the slave woman, or the son of the Egyptian Hagar. not very complimentary. As far as God is concerned, as we will see in verse 12, he is called Hana'ar. Hana'ar. And as far as Hagar is concerned, he will be Hayeled. Hagar says he's my little boy. Abraham says he's my son. Sarah says that slave woman's child, and God uses the objective language of Hana'ar. So it's very interesting how just by using the way that we talk about Ishmael, we have a sense of everybody's feeling in this story. Quite an amazing technique. If I'm not mistaken, this is written in one of Nechama Leibovitz's book about how to teach Tanakh. So whichever way, verse 11, the matter distressed Avraham greatly for Al Odot Bano because of his son. It's his son, right? I think it's really important to understand for Avraham knew that Ishmael was going to be born. Avraham had Ishmael as a son 13 years before Yitzchak was even announced. Yitzchak is born when Ishmael is 14 years old. If he's now being weaned, that means in this story, Ishmael is about 16, okay? 17, something like that. Think about it, for 13, 14 years, Avram thinks that Ishmael is the son. In fact, when Avram hears he's having Yitzchak, he says, Lu Yishmael yichyeh lefanecha. What about Ishmael? God says, the covenant will be through Yitzchak, but Avram has every reason to think that he should raise Ishmael in his traditions of chesed, in his traditions of hospitality. And of course, the Midrash even says that when Avram welcomes the three angels into his tent, who's helping him out? His wife Sarah and none other than Ishmael. Ishmael is the for Avraham is his son. He would never want to get rid of him. Okay. Vayomer Elohim el Avraham. I'm in verse 12. Don't feel bad. Don't feel bad. It says in the previous verse, Vayera. Don't feel bad. Listen to what Sarah says. Because in Yitzchak, he will be your offspring. And I also make the son of this maidservant into a nation, because he is your seed. Avram gets up in the morning and he takes bread and a pitcher of water and he gives it to Hagar, Samal Shichma. He puts it on her shoulder. The Yeled is not on her shoulder, he's a strapping 16-year-old guy. Okay? And she goes and she gets lost, wanders in the wilderness of Beersheba. And by the way, this is going to be very important. Had they not got lost, they would have made it to Beersheba and they could have filled up with water. But because they got lost in the desert, verse 15, Vayichlu hamayim min hachemet, the water runs out. And she abandons her child. She doesn't throw him because she can't throw him. He's a big boy. Under one of the bushes, so that he'll have shade. She sits far away, far away, I can't bear to watch him die, but she's helpless. She sits at afar, and she cries. Interestingly, God doesn't hear her voice, he hears his voice. Right? What is going on, Hagar? God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. Pick him up. Second time in the chapter, I will make him into a great nation. He opened her eyes. She sees a spring of water or a well of water, and she fills up her water bottle, and she lets the boy drink. How does it end? God was with the boy. He grew up. He stayed in that wilderness. And he was a bowman or an archer. And he lived in the wilderness of Paran. End of story. So let's see what we can say about this story. Was Avram doing something unethical? Was Avram doing something wrong? How could Avram let Ishmael and Hagar die in the desert? All the commentaries here, if you see here, we've got the Radak, we've got the Ibn Ezra. Oh, I didn't translate them. Never mind. I'll read them for you. Want to say that what Avram did here was not unethical. This is not an Akedah. Why is it not an Akedah? Because he's not killing anyone. If you take it, you look at the Radak, for example, Natan lehem mazon liyom o liyomayim. He gave them food for a day or two. Ki lo tuchal od laseit. Because how much can they carry? The guy mayim natan. He also gave her water. Ki darka hayat derech midbar. Because she had to go through the wilderness. And we know how hot it is in the wilderness. But he says, where did she want to go? Remember, she's Hagar HaMitzrit. When she eventually finds a wife for Ishmael, she finds him a wife from where? From Egypt, correct? Okay, so ki darka hayta derech midbar lashuv el Mitzrayim. Her way was to go down to Egypt, or karov la'al b'nei mishpachta, to go back to her family. Ki mitzrit hayta. V'gam kesef v'zahav natan la. He gave her silver and gold. Aval pi shelo katuv ki lo shalcha vet narika. Maybe let me put it this way. If you look at the story, you could really understand it this way, that what happens in this story is that she's going to basically catch a bus from the Tachana Merkazit of Beersheba. She's going to catch the caravan, right, which is going through the desert near where Abraham is encamped. They're in Midbar Beersheba. Just like in the story of Joseph, they know exactly where the caravans travel. You don't want to give them too much to carry. You don't want to give them too little. He gives them enough water and enough bread in order to make their way through the wilderness to Beersheba, but they get lost. Now, by the way, it could even be that they were going to fill up at a well, which Hagar knew about, except that she couldn't spot it. If you've ever seen a Ma'ayan, if you've ever gone to Ma'ayanot in the hills of Yehuda, wherever it is, frequently, if you didn't know they were there, you wouldn't see them. You wouldn't see them because they're sort of on the hillside. So it might even be that a bush had grown up over the Ma'ayan and it was right there, because it says she lifted up her eyes and there was a well. There was a well there the whole time. Avram gave her enough supplies so she could get where she needed to, probably gave her money, but she got lost. She couldn't find the well. She couldn't find the bus, right? It was all, now somebody said, why didn't he send servants with them? And the answer is that when Sarah says, Garesh HaMahazot, it means breaking ties with Hagar. Now, maybe let's try and understand a little bit why this is so important. And I want to do this through two perspectives, one through the Midrash and one through the ancient Near Eastern text of the Hammurabi Code. And let me understand, and let's see what we can say here. Okay, let's start with the laws of the Hammurabi. For those of you who know, laws of the Hammurabi Code was a code from Mesopotamia, which was a legal code from the king of the Hammurabi from Abraham's time. And it tells you sort of the way they looked at things legally in their age. Let's take a look, and you'll see how similar this is to the story of Hagar and Ishmael. Okay, let's look at paragraph 146. If a man take a wife, and she give this man a maidservant as a wife, and she bears him children, right? So he has a wife, Sarah, and she gives him a maidservant, Hagar, and she has children. And then this maid assumes equality with the wife because she's born him children. Her master shall not sell her for money, but she may keep her as a slave, reckoning her amongst the maidservants. This relates to the first story about Hagar. Do you remember that incident that Hagar got pregnant? And when she got pregnant, what did she do? She started Vatekal Gabirta Ba'inah. She started not quite, how should I say it? Not quite respecting Sarah. Not every time Sarah asked her to do the housework, she said, well, I'm pregnant, I can't do it. So she is assuming equality with the real wife. So what does it say here, right? He shall not sell her for money, but he may keep her as a slave, reckoning her amongst the maidservants. Now, Hagar didn't like that, and I'll come to that in a minute. Let's keep going. 170. If a wife bears sons to a man, and his maidservant also has sons, so just by example, Sarah has a son, and Hagar has a son. And the father, while still living, says to the children who the maidservant has born, my sons. So if Abraham would say to Ishmael during his lifetime, you are my son, and he counts them with the sons of his wife, then if the father dies, if Abraham dies, the sons of the wife and the maidservant will divide the paternal property in common. The sons of the wife is to participate, is to partition and to choose. So if Abraham had said, Ishmael is my son and Yitzchak is my son, then they would divide equally. If, however, paragraph 171, the father, while still living, did not say to the sons of the maidservant, my sons, but then the father dies, then the son of the maidservant shall not share with the sons of the wife, but the freedom of the maid and her son shall be granted. Let's understand. Let's say this again. Let's say you have a son from a maidservant, and you say, you are not my son. My son is Yitzchak. It is not Ishmael. Well, then they won't inherit. But what you have to do, they have to be sent free. The sons of the wife have no right to enslave the sons of the maid, and the wife shall take her dowry. This is the law in the time. This is the law of these times. So, if you understand this, what's actually happening is, let's remember what Sarah said. Ki lo yirash ben ha'amazot in bani Yitzchak, because this slave woman's son cannot inherit my son. What's she saying? She's saying, oh gosh, if we leave Ishmael in place, then what will happen? Right? He will inherit, they will inherit as equals. And who will be Zerah Avraham? Didn't God say to you, Avraham, Ki biyitzchak yikarei lecha zara? So the only way to do it is garesh. By the way, what is garesh? Divorce her. Literally divorce her, right? If you remember the language of gerushin in the Torah, it is v'shilcha mi beito. He sends her out of his house. The way to divorce her, the way to send her out of his house, is to give her her freedom. Okay? So I hope this is somewhat clear. And what I'm basically saying is this story, in all its aspects, really relates to the story of the laws of the Hammurabi Code. That's number one. Number two, I want to relate to the question, was Ishmael a bad boy? Was he a bad influence? Was he somehow evil? And here there is a very famous midrash which Rashi quotes, but I'm going to adopt the last bit of the midrash, but we'll have to read the whole thing. And the question is, when we read that line, that Ishmael is mitzachek, what was he doing? So let's read this midrash and review. I'm going to read it very quickly in the Hebrew, in the English, whatever, but let's try and understand. We don't know what this mitzachek is. Ateret Sarat Hagar mitzrit mitzachek. Amar Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai said, Rabbi Akiva haya omer bo davar ganai. Rabbi Akiva interpreted the word letzachek, Ishmael's laughter, in a negative manner. Ani omer bo davar l'shevach, I see it as positive. So let's see three opinions according to Rabbi Akiva. The first opinion of Rabbi Akiva is that what was it? Ein metzachek el gilui arayot. What is he talking about, right? That she saw that Ishmael was mitzachek, and what does that mean? That he was doing something sexually inappropriate. Where do we learn this from? If you remember the story of Yosef with Eshet Potiphar, it says, Ba Elai ha'eved ha'ivri asher heveta lanu letzachek bi. You have brought this Israelite man, a servant, to make sport with me, to mock me. But it means to seduce me, right? Now, of course, what was Ishmael doing? And it says, what could Ishmael have been doing? Sarah saw Ishmael molesting and assaulting other women. Interesting. Rabbi Ishmael says, no, you're not reading the word tzachik right. Tzachok means avodat kochavim. It actually means idolatry. How do we know? because if you look at the parallel word in the golden calf, it says Vayakumu letzachek. They rose up. So letzachek means he saw him doing avodah zarah. Really? Did Ishmael do avodah zarah? It says, yes, she did. She saw him making little altars so that his father wouldn't see, and hunting grasshoppers. According to the last opinion of Rabbi Elazar, Banosha Rabbi Yossi Aglili, Sechok means shvichut damim. And here, once again, they have another interesting word where it talks about l'sachek in the context of murder. And he says, what was he doing? He was playing. Remember, Ishmael was an archer. What was he doing? He was playing firing practice, like by putting an apple on Ishmael's on Yitzchak's head and saying, here, let me do some firing practice. And Sarah sees Ishmael doing archery practice on Yitzchak's head, and she wasn't very happy. Now, what's this midrash trying to do? It's trying to say that Ishmael needed to go. Why? Because he's guilty of the three biggies, right? The three big sins. Number one, avodah zarah. Number two, shvichut damim. Number three, giloy arayot, idolatry, adultery, and murder. And Ishmael's a bad boy. Is this the pshat? I don't think so. What's the pshat? Let's look at the next paragraph. I read it positively, says Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. What is sechot? Ein sechot ela lashon Yerusha. I hope people are with me. If you're not with me, here, let me just highlight. I'm reading this paragraph. Ein lashon sechot ela lashon Yerusha. And now read carefully. Shebasha shenolad avinu Yitzchak haya kol smechim. When Yitzchak was born, remember, how old is Ishmael when Yitzchak's born? He's 14. When Yitzchak was born, everybody is happy. The heir has been born. Yitzchak has been born. Amar lahem Ishmael shotim atem. You fools, he says. Don't be silly. I'm the firstborn. I take a double portion. And we infer this from Sarah's response. For the son of this slave woman shall not inherit. Let's explain. What did Sarah see that she says he has to go? What did she see? And it seems quite clear what she saw. Everybody's getting excited about the birth of Yitzchak, and they're saying he's going to be the heir of the family. Ishmael has a smirk on his face. That's what it means, mitzachek. He's smirking, and she can see exactly what he's intending. He's saying, what are you talking about? I'm the older brother. I'm 14 years older than him. When Avram dies, I'm the Bechor. I'm going to take over. Sarah looks at Ishmael's face and she said, Ishmael is never going to give way for Yitzchak. Yitzchak's always going to be the younger brother, the second in line. Unless what? Unless we make a statement now that there is only one heir to Abraham, and that is Yitzchak. I go back to the text here, and what does it say? Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, born to Abraham, and here we're going to say, mocking, jesting, laughing. And she said to Abraham, cast out that slave woman and her son, for the son of that slave shall not share in the inheritance of my son Yitzchak. If we leave Ishmael here, it will be a joint inheritance according to the law of the land, according to the Hammurabi code. Remember, Hammurabi is a Mesopotamian law, but Avram is from Mesopotamia. And therefore we have to make them leave in order that it will be clear who is the inheritor of the family. So I hope that's pretty clear. And now we understand two things. The way we might read it is, Sarah realized that we have to make a statement now. Avram didn't want to do it. He said, it can wait till I'm older. Sarah said, no, now. And God says, I agree, now. And therefore he sent them out, not unethically. He sent them out to catch the bus to Egypt so that she could go home to her family. She's now, as we see many times in the Bible, when a woman suffered divorce, she would go back to her father's house. We know that about, the story of Tamar or whatever it was. But she lost her way and there was a near disaster. But an angel came along and saved her. Now, I want to say something about this story because it looks like This story is a very unfortunate story for Hagar and Ishmael. And yet, if you read the story, and we do read it every Rosh Hashanah, I would argue that the narrator is very sympathetic to Ishmael. We heard God say to Abraham, "L'goy gadol asimenu," I will make him into a great nation. The Malach as well, right? He says, "Harbar ber zarech v'lo yisafer." He says, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong text. Let me just find the text. Apologize. He says, here we go. L'goy gadol asimenu, I will make him into a great nation, right? Verse 18. He says to Abraham, 1 minute. V'gamet ben ha'ama, l'goy asimenu, ki zarachahi, right? Verse 13. As for the son of the slave woman, I will make him too into a nation, because he is your seed. There's no sense that Ishmael is bad, according to the Pshat. And there's a sense that Ishmael gets a blessing, right? Vayehi Elohim et anar. God was with the boy. Ishmael is somebody who God blesses. So what's the story for Ishmael? And for this, we need to go one further stage. And I think this, for me, really frames the story very interestingly. And here, please look in source number 4, where Hagar flees from Sarah the first time. I think you remember the story. Sarah allows Avram to marry Hagar. Hagar gets pregnant and she starts belittling Sarah. And Sarah abuses her, puts her in her place. And that's what the Hammurabi Code says she can do. And Hagar runs away. Let's read the story. An angel of the Lord found by the water fountain in the desert. And he said to Hagar, Shifchat Sarai, Hagar, you Sarah's maidservant, where are you coming from and where you're going? And she says, I am running away from Hagar. And the angel said, return to your mistress and allow yourself to be afflicted into her hands. Now, by the way, this says that she obviously wasn't being beaten. She just didn't like being a slave, and I'll explain it in a minute. And he says, I'll multiply your seed. You won't be able to count them. And he says, you are pregnant, and you will bear a son, and his name will be Ishmael, because the Lord has heard your affliction. Notice, Yishmael, God will hear. What a beautiful name. You know, in the times of the Gemara, they used to call there's Rabbi Ishmael, there's a Kohen Gadol called Yishmael ben Elisha. Ishmael's a beautiful name. Only with the advent of Islam, Jews stopped calling their children Ishmael. But Ishmael used to be a Jewish name. But now look what he says. Verse 12. And he will be a wild donkey of a man, his hand upon all and everyone's hand upon him, and before all his brothers he will dwell. Can you imagine if you get a blessing from an angel and they say, you're going to have a child and he'll be a donkey of a man? Is that meant to look good or bad? What's he saying? Doesn't sound very good, right? So let's ask a question. Why does Hagar run away? Remember, the abuse isn't so bad because the angel says, go back. She didn't like being a slave. But I think you all remember, what is it, Huckleberry Finn or whatever it is, that you have the slave woman and she has a child and then she runs away. Why? Because she says, it's one thing for me to be a slave, but my child, I don't want that for my child. I want my child to live in freedom. The minute Hagar realizes she's pregnant, she runs away because she says, if I'm going to have a child, why should that child be a slave? I'd prefer to run away. And this is indeed the blessing. And he will be a wild donkey of a man. Look at the Ibn Ezra here at the bottom of the sheet. He says, a wild man means the freest of men, as in, who let the donkey go free? In other words, that no man will control him. Lo yimshol bo zar mimishpachto. If you look at the reference in Eov, who let the wild donkey free? Who untied his ropes? I gave him the wasteland as his home, the salt flats as his habitat. He laughs at the commotion in the town. He does not hear a driver's shout. He ranges the hills for his pasture and searches for any green thing. In other words, you have donkeys. You know, in the Middle East, the donkey is like a truck. It carries a lot of weight. There are donkeys, just like there are domesticated pigs, there are wild boar, right? So there are donkeys who bear a load, and then there are wild donkeys, right? So who let the wild donkey free who untied his ropes? He laughs at the commotion in the town. He doesn't hear a driver's shouts. Think about the free donkey, the wild donkey. He's like, I would never go and be a donkey in a town. What is the angel saying to Hagar? The angel is saying to Hagar, I promise you that you will have your own nation and that your son will be free like a wild donkey. Your child will not grow up in captivity. Your child will not grow up as a slave boy. He will grow up as a free man. Now, this is at the center of this drama because, of course, now Ishmael has been, for the first 14 years, Ishmael was raised as Abraham's son. But now that Yitzchak has been born, if Ishmael stays around, Yitzchak will not be the heir, the sole heir. So Ishmael has to go. Avram doesn't like it, but let's understand, if he stays, he's going to have to be a slave boy. So now let's go to our last page. And I think here's the crux of the story. This is a chiastic story. It starts with the fulfillment of the blessing to Sarah and Abraham, and the laughter at Isaac's birth, and the nursing of Isaac. But now, the critical verse, the linchpin of the story, the tipping point is when Sarah sees the son of the slave woman, Ben Hagar Mitzvit, he's gloating, he's laughing, he says, give me a break. He's never going to rule the farm. I'm going to rule the farm. And she says, that cannot be. Lo yirash ben ha'amah in bani Yitzchak. By the way, a good word for Sarah. Avram is always magnanimous. Avram is always generous. Avram has his tents wide open. He wants to be inclusive. Sarah has to make the tough decisions. And now they send Sarah out. Now, they send Hagar and Ishmael away. Is this bad? So what I want to claim is this. A1, B1, C1, the beginning of the story is the fulfillment of the blessing to Sarah and Abraham. But in the second bit of the story, Ishmael almost dies and he is reborn. Let's put it this way. We have, as opposed to nursing Yitzchak, we have Ishmael's thirst. As opposed to the laughter, we have the tears. And then we have the rebirth of Ishmael. But what is this? It is, in fact, the fulfillment of the promise to who? To Hagar and Ishmael. Hagar, when she ran away from Avram and Sarah the first time, why did she run away? Because she wanted to be free, and more than anything else, she wanted a son to be free. In other words, here, the chapter we're reading, chapter 21, is in fact the fulfillment of multiple blessings. And it's the fulfillment to Avram that he will have a child from him and Sarah, but it's also the fulfillment of the promise to Hagar. The promise that was made by the well, how appropriately that now we're back at a well. The promise which was made the well, which said, you will be a free woman and your son will be a free man. And what we see in the story is that it ends off with Ishmael being able to live very successfully, Ishmael being able to live very, very well in the Midbar. He's able to survive there. He's able to prosper. As Rav Meidan once said, who knows, maybe he took that well which the angel showed him and he built a little hotel there. He built a service station there where everybody stopped in the wilderness. Maybe added a little, guest house and a casino and who knows what else, right? A nice restaurant, yeah. And he made quite a successful living there. Maybe he even, as an archer, provided protection services so that people wouldn't have pirates attacking them as they went through the Midbar. Who knows? The point is that the Midbar became a place that Hagar and Ishmael were able to live and prosper. And therefore, what I would actually argue is, maybe when we saw the story the first time, we called it an Akedah. And of course, it was hard for Avram. It's definitely a test for Avram. This is far from an Akedah. Avram is not being asked to give up his entire future. He's being asked to give up Ishmael because Yitzchak is going to be, as God told him, that he be Yitzchak, he karel chazara. Yitzchak will be by the way, this is a very strong statement, that it is not just Abraham's child who needs to be the future, but as Rav Soloveitchik put it, the covenantal couple. It needs to be Avram and Sarai who would be the parents of the future. It's not just Abraham's son, it needs to be Abraham and Sarah. It is not just a male-based tradition, it is Avram and Sarah who have to have the future of the Jewish people, and that's why Ki Yitzchaki Karela Chazara. Sarah realizes this. She realizes Ishmael has to stay around. Yitzchak's future as the sole heir is in jeopardy. Avram sends them out in the most ethical way he knows how, with money, with food, provisions, but they get lost, they miss the bus. They can't find, they get stuck. And God so much wants this child, Abraham's child, to live and to be successful. A miracle is done for them. But I want to understand that this story is all about the fulfillment of prophecies and promises, not just the promise to Avram and Hagar, but also, not just the promise to Avram and Sarai, but also the promise to Hagar and Ishmael. That promise which was back in chapter 15 by the well side, where they were chapter 16 by the well side, where Hagar was told, and that he will be a para Adam, he will be like a wild donkey, because she wanted nothing more than her child to be free. Sarah gets a blessing, Avram gets his blessing, and so does Hagar and Ishmael. And in this regard, this is a double story, a story about mothers and sons, about mothers and children, where the desperate mother, Sarah, gets her fulfillment, and the desperate mother, Hagar, gets her son back. Her son is reborn as her son and her son only, but he is blessed with the blessing that she hoped for when she was pregnant for him. So this is, I hope I've sort of reshaped the story for you. And it becomes a very round story, I think, a very round story. And now I think you also can tell the big differences between this story and the Akedah. The Akedah is really a sense of mortal danger. It's a sense of giving up the entire future. This is a very, very different story where several women get their promises realized and Hashem comes through on his promises. So that's it. I think there's another shir very soon after, so I don't think we've got much time, but I'll just answer the last thing, which is in the, was Hagar an Egyptian princess? That is a midrash, okay? That is a midrash, and the midrash will then say that an Egyptian princess preferred to be in Avram's household than to be in the unethical court of Egypt, right? But I think that's just a midrash, right? And I think Al Pi Pshat, she is an Egyptian maidservant. Okay, I'll take a quick question from Sandra.
Yes, hi. Thank you so much, Rabbi Israel. Epiphany on top of epiphany. But let me just say, Rabbi Silber suggests something. He says that since originally there was only one day of Rosh Hashanah, and so the week, what we call the first day of the Torah reading, which is the chapter that you've elucidated for us today, was really the only chapter that was read. And then later on, the day 2 of Rosh Hashanah, we had the Akedah. So actually, you've helped me to understand, because nobody's there to come back and tell us, yes, that's true or not. But if in fact that's true, that day one, the Ishmael story, and it's only of recent happening that day 2 is added. So we have both, quote unquote, both test 1 and test 2. So, but you've helped me because really the first story contains within it the most beautiful Rosh Hashanah message, which is when things are most dire, even when nature is against you. Sarah was almost 100 years old and her breasts had shrunk like raisins, the Torah text says, kamot simukim. And with Hagar and Ishmael, they were in a desert that was very uncharitable to people, and they should have died. So even at its most hopeless, I found that now you've opened chapter 21 to me as a paradigm for a Torah reading for Rosh Hashanah, even if I didn't have day 2 and the Akedah story, because God is the one who remembers and fulfills promises for the hopeless.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Thank you for that comment and that reflection. And what we'll do is next week, we're actually going to have a shir, even though it's going to be still before Rosh Hashanah, I'm going to be giving a shir about Yom Kippur. So you're going to get an early Yom Kippur shir next week. And we're going to talk a little bit about the ritual of the Kohen Gadol and the Sa'ir La'azazel, the scapegoat. We'll talk about that next week. Okay, so Litraot.
Thank you.
Did the sound turn out? Was it was it okay in the end?
Well, it wasn't excellent, actually. It was about 80 to 90%, but I don't know what we can do.
Yeah, I spent a whole morning yesterday with the technician, so I'll have to get back to him and see what I can do. All right, fantastic.
You know something? Maybe they could put a booster. Sometimes I know you have your little box that's in everybody's home. Sometimes my son, who knows this stuff, he's an engineer. He says sometimes you can put a booster box so that you have a box and a box that enhances the signal that you're getting. So maybe just suggest to him.
See what I can do.
Get a booster box.
I will suggest it. Thank you ever so much. Have a good week, everybody. Shabbat shalom.
Thank you so much. Thank you.